The year was 1893, and New York City was a symphony of jarring contradictions, a metropolis gilded on one side and grimy on the other. Above Fifth Avenue, the gaslight cast a buttery, warm glow on the marble palaces of the new aristocracy. Here, the air was thick with the scent of French perfume, aged cigar smoke, and the faint, sweet decay of fortunes newly minted. The Vanderbilts and Astors reigned supreme, their homes monuments to an excess that defied gravity and good taste. Carriages, sleek and black, rolled silently over paved streets, their occupants swathed in velvet and silk, on their way to extravagant balls where fortunes were gambled and social standing was fiercely upheld. This was a world of endless chandeliers, crystalline champagne flutes, and the hushed whispers of society scandals. A world built on the back of industry and the labor of an unseen populace. One of these palaces was the newly finished residence of Mr. Silas Thorne, a railroad magnate. Inside, his daughter, Ilara Thorne, stood before a massive mirror, her reflection a shimmering tapestry of sapphire silk and diamonds. At 18, she was a privileged prisoner, trained for the sole purpose of making an advantageous marriage. The music from the ballroom below was a distant, measured beat, the heartbeat of the ruling class. She felt a profound emptiness behind the dazzling facade, a growing dissonance between the glittering spectacle and a quiet yearning for something real. A mere mile downtown, in the labyrinthine alleys of the Lower East Side, the sounds were dramatically different. Here, the air was a pungent mix of coal smoke, stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the clamor of a dozen different languages. The streets were a treacherous patchwork of mud and cobblestones, perpetually shadowed by towering, rickety tenements, crammed shoulder to shoulder. In these five-story warrens, light was a luxury, and privacy a forgotten word. Entire families, immigrants from Italy, Ireland, and Eastern Europe, were shoehorned into single, suffocating rooms, often working where they slept in unregulated sweatshops. This was where Killian Finn O'Connell lived, in the third-floor room that smelled eternally of mildew and cabbage. At 21, Finn was a dock worker, his hands calloused from hauling cargo, his back perpetually aching. He was not poor by choice, but by circumstance, caught in the city's ravenous industrial machine. He and his neighbors were the unseen gears of the gilded machine uptown. Their relentless back-breaking labor fueled the endless champagne of Silas Thorne's parties. Tonight, a frigid wind whipped through the broken window pane. Finn was reading by the weak light of a kerosene lamp, not a dime novel, but a worn pamphlet on workers' rights. The music from uptown did not reach him, but the desperation of his neighbors did. The cough of a consumptive child, the weary tread of a woman returning from a 14-hour shift in a garment factory. The divide between Ilara's world and Finn's was more than mere geography. It was an abyss of wealth and opportunity. They were two souls existing on opposite sides of the same coin, each trapped by their station, Ilara with her gilded cage, and Finn with his crushing struggle for a loaf of bread and an honest day's wage. Yet in the shared darkness of the New York night, a common whisper threaded its way between the mansions and the tenements, a low, persistent current of change, of a world about to be pulled apart and put back together in a new, uncertain shape. The opulence of Fifth Avenue and the stark reality of the slums were not separate worlds, but two essential halves of the same restless city, ready to... The opportunity arrived, not in a grand ballroom, but in the most unlikely of settings. The ornate, yet strangely democratic space of the New York Public Library, a project still under construction, but whose research rooms were already open to the public. Ilara Thorne had, against her father's wishes, begun to slip away from the controlled boredom of Fifth Avenue. She disguised her expensive gowns beneath a drab, heavy woolen coat, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, seeking refuge in the hushed alcoves of the library. She wasn't seeking romance, but knowledge.
specifically an understanding of the terrifying numbers her father, Silas Thorne, had been trying to conceal regarding the escalating steel crisis. On this particular afternoon, she was poring over dry reports on interstate commerce and rail charters, the complex language spinning her head. She was trying to comprehend how a man with such immense wealth could be brought to the brink by an unseen industrial maneuver. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and leather. A moment later, a stack of heavy bound volumes on economic history slid off the edge of her table with a loud, embarrassing thud. "I apologize, miss. That was careless of me," said a low, measured voice. Ilara looked up, her breath catching slightly. Standing over her was a young man, dressed in the rough, mended clothes of a laborer, yet possessing a startling intensity in his clear, sea-gray eyes. This was Killian Finn O'Connell. He was not supposed to be here, but Finn often used the public research room, seeking the very information that the wealthy guarded, the mechanisms of their power. He was studying the history of industrial strikes, searching for the key to organizing the desperate men he represented. Their first interaction was brief, functional, yet charged with the invisible electricity of two worlds meeting. "It's quite all right," Ilara murmured, regaining her composure. As Finn stacked the heavy books, she noticed the deep, indelible calluses on his hands, the markers of relentless physical labor, a stark contrast to the pampered softness of her own. Finn, meanwhile, couldn't help but notice the quality of the threadbare coat she wore, the delicate line of her jaw, and the unmistakable anxious intelligence in her gaze. She was not like the usual idle society girls who occasionally drifted in and out of the library for show. "You're reading about the railroad charters," Finn observed, nodding toward the dense legal text. His tone was not accusatory, but curious. Ilara hesitated, feeling exposed. "I'm trying to understand the current situation. My family is involved in the industry." Finn gave a short, cynical smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Involved is one word, ruling is another. The situation you read about in those fancy books is the same situation my neighbors are freezing through tonight because the freight yards are shut down. It's the difference between a falling stock price and an empty stomach." His blunt honesty was like a sharp, cold wind that pierced through her carefully constructed Fifth Avenue bubble. He had introduced not a theory, but a human consequence to her father's financial woes. "And you?" Ilara asked, gesturing toward the heavy volume on the Great Rail Strike of 1877 he had been studying. Finn fixed her with a direct look that made her forget the library, her coat, and her name. "I am involved because my life and the lives of every working man I know are the fuel for those railroads. I am looking for the way to turn the engine off, to make them listen. I am looking for a lever, miss. The same one that's about to ruin your family." Their fates had crossed. Ilara, seeking abstract knowledge to save her family's fortune, and Finn, seeking practical knowledge to empower the working class, had found themselves bound by the very crisis her father had created. He was the person who could give her the ground-level reality that the ticker tape obscured, and she, unknowingly, held the keys to the information he needed about the looming industrial collapse. The socialite had encountered the activist, and the main driver of the plot, the merging of the worlds of privilege and protest. The old ledger from the Reconstruction era was a heavy burden, revealing the moral corruption at the heart of Silas Thorne's empire. But as Ilara Thorne and Cillian Finn O'Connell meticulously examined the full scope of Thornrail's expansion, they found that the rot extended far beyond the Mason-Dixon line, stretching west into the very promise of the western frontier. Silas Thorne's relentless push westward was not merely a matter of economic strategy. It was an embodiment of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were divinely ordained to settle the entire continent. The ledger contained details not of southern land seizures, but of vast, often contested tracts acquired in the Dakotas and Montana during the 1880s and early 1890s. This land was critical for Thorne's planned expansion, the very project now stalled by the steel crisis. The documents were sanitized, referring only to unoccupied federal lands or treaty-ceded territories. But Finn, using his contacts within the burgeoning socialist press, managed to procure copies of maps and local newspaper clippings from the Western territories that painted a starkly different picture. The conflict was raw and brutal. The railroads, symbolized by Thorn Rail, were the iron horse that brought settlers, miners, and the military deep into the traditional hunting grounds of the Lakota and Cheyenne. The documents proved that Thorn Rail had received enormous federal land grants, subsidized by the government specifically to lay tracks through land that was either still legally contested or, more damningly, land guaranteed to native tribes by treaty. "My father didn't just buy up the South with dirty money, Alara," Finn stated, tracing a finger across a map showing the proposed Thorn Northern Line cutting directly across a major river valley. He capitalized on the final subjugation of the Plains tribes.
Shockwaves from the Thorn Rail expose were immense. Silas Thorne was financially ruined and politically isolated. The stock plummeted to nothing, and the disgraced magnate fled the city, his Fifth Avenue palace suddenly silent and dark. But for Alara Thorne and Finn O'Connell, the battle had only just begun. The goal was to secure the future of the land and assets built on such corruption, and to do that, they needed every document they could find. They knew that a man as meticulous as Silas Thorne would have hidden his most damning secrets away from his official Wall Street office. Their instincts, guided by the historical pattern of exploitation, led them straight back to the Lower East Side, the place where the profits of his corruption were most keenly felt. The clue in the brickwork. Alara had remembered a seemingly innocuous entry in the old ledger, a reference to a rental property on Hester Street, listed under a pseudonym and designated as private storage. This property, they discovered, was a derelict four-story tenement, its apartments overcrowded and poorly maintained, one of hundreds owned by shell companies tied to Thorne. Finn, whose knowledge of the neighborhood was absolute, recognized the building immediately. It was one of the worst on the block, perpetually plagued by leaks and disease. They gained access late one frigid night, avoiding the exhausted, suspicious tenants. The private storage unit was not a basement vault, but a small empty room on the top floor, accessible only through a closet in the superintendent's tiny, crowded apartment. Inside the small, dusty room, there was nothing but peeling paint and the smell of rot. Alara, however, noticed a subtle difference in the brickwork behind a loose piece of plaster, a section that didn't match the rest of the wall. Using a crowbar Finn had brought, they pried away the section of the wall. The discovery. The trust fund. Behind the plaster and brick lay not gold or jewels, but a small, heavy iron box containing stacks of legal documents wrapped in oilskin. The most significant document was a secret, irrevocable trust deed, dated 1891, 2 years before the current crisis. Silas Thorne, anticipating the volatility of his empire, had taken a massive portion of his liquid assets derived directly from the illegal southern and western land deals and placed them into a protected trust fund. The beneficiaries were vaguely listed as charitable organizations dedicated to industrial development. But the true secret was a list of specific instructions and an accompanying ledger detailing the actual source of the funds. The profits from the seizure and resale of land from the freed black families in Alabama, and the proceeds from the first rail lines laid over Native American treaty lands. The fund was designed to be untouchable by creditors, ensuring that no matter how his rail company fared, this portion of his wealth, the original seed of the corruption, would survive. The trust fund, worth nearly $10 million, an astronomical sum for the time,
was a mechanism to preserve his dark legacy and potentially re-establish his power once the panic subsided. It was the ultimate secret in the tenement walls, hidden among the very people whose suffering had created it. For Alara Thorne and Finn O'Connell, the revelation was galvanizing. They had not only found the final piece of the financial puzzle, but they had also discovered a huge, unspent fortune directly linked to the victims of Thorne's crimes. Their mission now shifted from exposé to redistribution. They had to find a way to redirect that irrevocable trust fund back to the communities it had plundered. The discovery of the secret trust fund, the colossal, untouchable nest egg of corruption, galvanized Alara Thorne and
The ballroom and the backroom deal. The final gambit. The city was alight with speculation following the Great Thorne scandal and the fiery suffragist rally. While Alara Thorne and her allies prepared their civil suit to redirect the secret trust fund, the industrial barons of New York, momentarily stunned, began to rally. They understood that the successful redirection of the Thorne Trust would set a devastating precedent, proof that fortunes built on historical exploitation were vulnerable to the people. The conflict reached its terrifying peak not in a courtroom, but at the annual charity gala hosted by the powerful banker J.P. Caldwell, a close, if now slightly uneasy, associate of the disgraced Silas Thorne. The ballroom's deception. The Caldwell Mansion's ballroom was an island of defiant opulence. Thousands of candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, illuminating a sea of white ties and diamonds. This was the Gilded Age making its last desperate stand. Alara Thorne arrived not as a penitent daughter, but as a deliberate disruptor. She wore a gown of striking, unadorned black velvet, a silent protest amidst the glittering silk. She was there for a purpose: to be seen, to show the old guard that she was not broken, and to draw out the shadowy figures attempting to control the fallout. The music was a graceful, deceptive waltz. Alara exchanged curt nods with former acquaintances, their smiles brittle and their curiosity thinly veiled. She knew the pretense, the polite conversation, the champagne, the charity, was merely the velvet curtain drawn over the sinister, clandestine agreement taking place just yards away. The backroom deal. In a secluded library adjoining the main hall, away from the laughter and the light, the true industrial barons were gathered. The air here was heavy with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive port. Among them was Mr. Caldwell, the host, and several key trustees of the irrevocable Thorne Trust, men who now stood to lose millions. Finn O'Connell was not invited, but he was present. Utilizing his dockside ingenuity and Alara's detailed floor plans of the mansion, he had successfully infiltrated the staff area and was now positioned in a dimly lit service corridor directly outside the library door, the mahogany paneling separating him from the climax of the plot. Finn didn't need to see them to know their intentions. He only needed to listen. The girl has the old ledger, she has the press, but we have the law. Caldwell's voice, usually jovial, now was cold and sharp. The trust is airtight, but if she proves the funds are fruit of the poisoned tree, every last one of us is exposed. This was the stage for the dramatic event. Alara arrived with a handful of Mrs. Prescott's most fearless suffragists and Thomas Grant, the investigative journalist. She carried the original damning ledger and the secret trust deed. Finn met her at the periphery of the crowd, his face grim. "The police are on their way, Alara. We have minutes before the situation is out of control," Finn warned. "Then we make every minute count," she stated, her voice steady. The public confrontation. Alara, dressed in her somber black, mounted an empty flatbed rail car in the center of the yard, placing the fragile leather-bound ledger on the bed beside her. Her appearance, the daughter of the disgraced baron standing with the striking workers, was a visual challenge to the entire system. The security guards surged forward, shouting orders to disperse. Just as the tension threatened to explode into violence, Ilara began to speak, her voice clear and carrying across the vast space. These men are not striking for mere wages. They are striking against the corruption that built this yard, against the lies that built this city, she cried, then dramatically held up the secret trust deed. Your money, Mr. Caldwell, and the wealth of your associates is about to be used to protect a crime against every person of color in the South and every native tribe in the West. She didn't stop there. She read specific, damning entries, the amount of money paid to military commanders for clearances in the Dakotas, the profit figures from the seized Alabama farmland.
The intense public confrontation at the Thorn rail yard achieved its immediate purpose. The pressure was too immense for the trustees of the secret fund to settle in the dark. The legal battle to redirect the $10 million was now unavoidable. But in the fragile alliance dedicated to justice, a fatal weakness, a betrayal, was about to surface. Ilara and Finn established a temporary base of operations in a rented brownstone on a quiet side street, a neutral, discreet space where they could meet with lawyers, organize the evidence, and plan their public campaign. The core of their strategy hinged on the testimony and investigative notes of Thomas Grant, the young journalist who had risked his career to break the story and had been instrumental in capturing the drama of the fires of change. The unseen hand. Grant, charismatic and seemingly dedicated, had become Ilara's right-hand man, translating legal jargon into compelling prose and setting up critical meetings with influential figures. Ilara trusted him implicitly, seeing him as a fellow crusader against the corruption of the industrial barons. She entrusted him with the most sensitive document, a full cross-referenced copy of the old ledger, complete with the victims' names and the exact financial links to the secret trust. One chilly evening, as Ilara and Finn were reviewing witness lists in the brownstone's drawing room, a messenger arrived with a sealed envelope for Ilara. It was from Mrs. Prescott, their suffragist ally, and the contents were devastating. The letter contained a curt notification. The primary legal firm representing the Southern and Western victims was abruptly withdrawing from the civil suit. The reason given was an unavoidable conflict of interest and the sudden disappearance of key evidence. A sickening realization washed over Ilara. "The ledger," she whispered, looking at the empty spot on the desk where the copied documents had been. "It's gone." Finn's instincts immediately turned to the journalist. They raced to Grant's small apartment in Greenwich Village, but it was empty save for a hastily scrawled note left on his desk. The note wasn't a confession, it was a receipt. A deposit slip from a major bank known to be heavily financed by J.P. Caldwell and his associates. The date on the slip was the day after the freight yard confrontation. The amount deposited was colossal, far exceeding a journalist's annual salary. Thomas Grant had been a plant all along. The primary antagonist wasn't Caldwell or the faceless trustees. It was the trusted lieutenant, the traitor planted to gain access and derail the effort from the inside. Grant's radical fervor had been the perfect mask for a mercenary's greed. The journalist had revealed his true colors. He was not a crusader for justice, but a shrewd operator who understood the immense price the barons would pay to protect their secrets. By seizing the evidence and ensuring the lawyers' withdrawal, Grant delivered a major setback to Ilara and Finn. The cornerstone of their case, the irrefutable proof linking the trust to the original crimes, was now in the hands of the very men they were trying to defeat. The ballroom's clandestine agreement had borne fruit not through legal trickery, but through the oldest trick in the book, betrayal by a trusted friend. Finn slammed his fist onto the wooden desk. They didn't just buy the judge, Ilara, they bought our shield. The brownstone, once a haven of conspiracy and hope, now felt suffocating, filled with the bitter smoke of their failure. The future of the $10 million trust was once again dangerously uncertain, and this time, the true source of the betrayal was a far more agonizing wound than any financial loss. The betrayal by Thomas Grant, The seizure of the key ledger copy had left Ilara Thorne and Finn O'Connell reeling. The barons had successfully stripped them of their primary legal weapon, forcing the civil suit to stall. The $10 million trust remained protected.
With the original, irrefutable documents secured from the Thorne archives, Ilara Thorne and Finn O'Connell had the firepower needed to win the legal battle and redirect the $10 million trust. However, they faced one last secondary challenge, one rooted in the honor and influence of the old guard who had facilitated Thorne's early corruption. The barons' lawyers, confident that the copied ledger was their only threat, moved to invalidate the documents, claiming they were fabricated after the original archivist, Mr. Elijah Vance, had been paid to discredit them. The barons were attempting to use the echoes of their past power, the ability to buy silence, to erase the truth. The archivists stand. The key to resolving this secondary conflict lay entirely with Mr. Vance. He was not just the keeper of the documents, he was the historical connection and the only living witness to the inner workings of Silas Thorne's early illicit deals. In a small, tense pre-trial hearing designed to determine the admissibility of the newly found documents, the Baron's lead counsel, Mr. Hemlock, attempted to dismiss Vance as a disgruntled, senile employee. Mr. Vance, you claim these documents are authentic, yet you kept silent for 40 years while this company built a dynasty? Why speak now, at the precise moment Ms. Thorne offers you notoriety? Hemlock challenged, his voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Vance, frail but steady, faced the court. I kept silent because Silas Thorne ensured that any whistleblower disappeared, sir. I was a poor man with a family. But I did not keep silent entirely. The hidden hand of honor. Vance then revealed the echoes of the old guard in a startling testimony. He explained that 40 years ago, when the unfinished tapestry of freedom, a look ahead. The $10 million trust was legally redirected, funding the Thorne Foundation for Social Equity and Labor Reform. This victory was not an ending, but the binding of a new thread into the unfinished tapestry of freedom, a project demanding continuous vigilance from the nation. The historical wrongs had been acknowledged, but the future remained wide open, demanding constant effort from those who believed in a just society. The nation's evolving narrative. The scandal irrevocably altered the narrative of the Gilded Age. The public could no longer ignore that the opulence of Fifth Avenue was fundamentally financed by the violence of the Reconstruction South and the Western frontier. The legal decision set a powerful precedent, inspiring similar challenges against other industrial giants. It exposed the lie of manifest destiny as a righteous expansion, revealing it instead as a history built on theft and exploitation. The national conversation shifted from mere economic anxiety to a profound debate on moral reckoning and the ethical obligations of wealth. The American dream was, by this reckoning, a promise that had to be earned through integrity, not stolen through corruption. Ilara, the architect of conscience. Ilara Thorne completely shed the confining skin of the socialite. She became the chairwoman of the new Thorne Foundation, applying the same meticulous intelligence she once used to study her father's ledgers to the complexities of social reform. Her Fifth Avenue mansion was sold, the proceeds directed toward the foundation's endowment. She moved into a modest but dignified brownstone in Gramercy Park, making her life's work the distribution of the reclaimed wealth. Her focus was not on charity, but on empowerment, financing legal aid societies for tenants and workers, establishing educational opportunities for the descendants of those whose land was seized, and funding the efforts of the nascent women's suffrage movement.